So, about 5 years ago, I was sitting on the train and I was observing the people around me. And I think it was the first time I realized that everyone around me was actually looking at their screens. They were not looking outside, only looking at their screens. And I realized I was actually doing the same thing most of the time on the train. But then I started to wonder about this whole digital experience that was going on around me, and I thought how interesting but also weird it is that we as human beings are having all these, or we are performing actions with flat screens in a very static type of way, while the rest of the world where we live in is very dynamic and very expressive. So, and since I was still studying, but I was going to be a designer, I thought about these digital experiences right now and what else is out there? What else can we think of as designers that makes it a little bit more tangible in a way? So what about the tactility of experiences and how we can actually evoke those with different types of digital experiences? So at this point, about 5 years ago, I thought by myself, okay, let's imagine there's a wonderful tactile world out there that expands way beyond flat screens. And I started to wonder, what does that look like? So around the same time, I just started my graduation project at the university, and it was something totally different. But since I just had this experience in the train and my thinking kind of shifted, I thought about, okay, so interaction design, what does it mean? And how can I actually take another approach to how we design for interactions? In the end of my graduation project, it was all about the material experiences, but it actually started off as a project which was mainly about a new technology of a smart, novel, light touch material that had all this potential and all these qualities, and I had no idea what to do with it. Because the only thing that I got from the beginning was, okay, so there's this group of material scientists that are developing this new type of technology, which is a smart material, they call it. And it has this great potential, and here's the book with all the technical specifications. And this is the drawing of this very interesting new type of technology. And we want you to design meaningful concepts with this smart material. And I thought, okay, meaningful concepts, and the only thing I get is a drawing and technical specifications and no samples, because it was still in development. So these material scientists were still working on, figuring out what this new technology was going to look like. So from this point on, I thought, oh my god, flexible piezoplastics? What is that? Flexible OLED layer? Okay. So, thank God I had a lot of very cool friends of mine that wanted to help me in figuring out what to do with this material. But to be honest, we couldn't get any further than gimmick-like applications. So, I found out that it was, for designers, it was very much needed that we needed to understand this material in a more tactile and visual type of way. So how to make a material that's just written out in text tangible when it's not there, when there are no samples. So I thought, okay, when they talk about a piezoplastic, they talk about you can deform the material and then somehow it would light up, and there's this OLED that would do all these crazy things with light. So what does that mean? So I grabbed a piece of plastic because it had the same flexibility as this novel material, and it had the same thickness, and I thought, okay, I'm just gonna play with this piece of plastic and just figure out what I can do with this? Well, other material, but kind of the same, I guess. So I found out that there are actually 8 types of deformation that you could achieve with this material. And the interesting thing that I found out was that it was very important to think about the texture of a material when you want to deform it in a way, but also the shape of a material. For example, when you look at stroking something, you don't really want to stroke something when it's kind of flat. So when you think about textures, that could be an interesting field to discover. The same with squeezing. When you squeeze something, it's very important that it has a shape that you actually want to squeeze, because otherwise you're not going to do that. Yeah, so from this point on, I needed to simulate the material with other types of materials. So I just used silicon at this point, and I started to figure out, okay, let's pick 2 of these types of deformation and figure out what the characteristics and the qualities of this material, of this tactile layer of this material should look like, so that people are actually going to stroke it and that people are actually going to squeeze it in the end. So I looked into all these different papers that also said something about different textures that you could use. So I started to make molds, and I just started to make all these different samples and started to test all these different samples with a group of people, and just let them explain to me why they wanted to have this type of interaction with these samples. So what I found out for stroking in this case, that it was very important when something is smooth, but it's also soft, but it also has some type of design that you actually want to finish the movement. So that was very helpful. And with squeezing, it was more about that it should actually fit in your hand, because people wanted to use their whole hand for that type of deformation. And then I thought, okay, so I'm still not going anywhere with this meaningful concept, but I guess this project is more about visualizing the types of interactions that are possible with this new type of material, so that then after that designers can actually start thinking about different types of applications. So I was more working on the step before that, in developing still the material. And I also found out that it helps if I was visualizing all these steps the whole time, and it really helped the material scientists as well, because they had no clue that designers couldn't come up with something, because they thought, we provided text. Why is that not enough? So I tried to visualize it in a way and also create a story around it, because I thought, when you create a story around using this material, it could actually be helpful for other people to see what is possible for the future. So that's what I did. I just put this stroking experience I was talking about and the squeezing into one mock-up that should tell the story of the material. And for this stroking experience, I found out that it was very helpful if I would have some type of design that had a gradient effect, so that people would actually finish the whole movement when they came into contact with the material and gave the material this input. And the light effect should also complete this movement. And the same actually with the shape. So I designed the shape in such a way that a hand would fit on it, and that the light effect, which was a pulsating light effect, matched what you put into the material. So in the end, with this project, I found out that it wasn't about the meaningfulness of a perfect concept, but it was more my job as a designer to be there at the start of developing these new technologies, these new smart materials, and also be a communicator in a way and a visualizer of what was actually possible. And I thought that was a very interesting thing that I found out, because it also made me realize that we, as designers, are so important, and we have a very, our value is huge when it comes to these new technologies. So after this project, I got very intrigued by the potential and the possibilities of materials, but also designing from a material experience or designing from a material perspective. So what I tried to do was apply for a multidisciplinary group at MIT, which is the Tangible Media Lab. And I thought, okay, I need a portfolio that shows something about what I can do with materials, or my view on how to design with materials. So these projects that I'm now going to show are part of this portfolio. And I just did them because I was interested in it. It was not a job or, yeah. So the first project is called, or I called it, BioPlastic Fantastic. Because I had just worked with a very futuristic new material, and I thought, you know, when we think about the materials of the future, I guess bioplastics could also be one. Since bioplastics are now, well, there's a lot of research going on to achieve the best bioplastics. But I think when we start now already and thinking of what is actually possible with these materials, then in a couple of years when the materials are already here, we have so many great ideas already that we can actually achieve. Instead of right now, for example, only packaging most of the time. So what I did was I looked for 3 recipes online, and it wasn't my goal to improve the recipes. It was more about, okay, so I'm just going to cook these bioplastics at home. I'm going to create all these different molds, and I want to find out about the tactile properties of this material. So what is actually possible, and what type of interactions can I evoke? So yeah, I used these 3 recipes, and I created these samples. And I divided them into flat sheets, into textured sheets, and into shapes to find out about these tactile properties of the material. And I just used whatever I had at my home, to be honest. So I used a cheese grater to create some textures. I had this very cool looking telephone box that had a very nice geometric shape. For shapes, I just used jars. I used wooden marbles to create something. I also used, I added extra materials. So I used sand, I used soap, I used carrot juice to just create some interesting looks. And in the end, when I had a table, or actually a couple of tables, full of all these bioplastic samples, I just started playing with them. So I thought, okay, if I have, if I'm gonna be in some way playful with these materials, what is possible? Can I bend it? Can I fold it? Which could be interesting. Can I twist it? Can I don't know, do something else with it that's maybe interesting for when I think about future concepts already in a way. I just wanted to figure out, okay, so what is possible and what is this potential of this bioplastic? And also about the visual aesthetics. I think that's a very important aspect in this case as well, because that broadens the possibilities. So I just put them all actually on this doll, not because it's a concept, but since I wanted to see, okay, so what have I created all together, and what do these samples trigger in the end to actually come up with something that could be helpful. So as you can see, a lot of them are translucent or transparent. A lot of them, well, they're also a little bit crooked, but that's more, I think, improvement of the recipe that's needed. But as you can see, there's so much already possible with only doing this at home and trying to figure out what we can actually do. So I guess, and I wanted to spend time actually also to do this as well, is to figure out, okay, so when I think about all these aspects, for example, this light aspect as well, but also the tangibility, we can also think of, for example, toys. That could be interesting because there are so many ways to be playful with this material, but also for light features or whatever you can come up with. Point is, importance of the characteristics of the material really help you to think further in this case. So at this point I thought, okay, I'm intrigued by materials, I'm intrigued by what experiences I can evoke with these materials, but it's also most of the time about emotional qualities of materials. So at this point I started a project which is called Burn and Bloom. And Burn and Bloom is about the transition you go through when you have just experienced heartbreak. So at this time I had experienced heartbreak, but I was already blooming in a way because I thought it's so interesting that you can turn something so ugly, or that something so ugly can transform again into something so beautiful. And I thought, I want to somehow visualize this transformation that you go through, and I want to visualize it in just 3 art pieces. It doesn't have to mean anything, but I want to try and use the type of materials that actually have some associations with this transformation. So I use garbage materials because I thought, garbage, we want to get rid of it, but when you use it and turn it into something beautiful again, it's kind of the same transformation we're thinking of. So I had all these conversations with women around me who also had experienced heartbreak, and they told me about how they felt. So I captured those stories that they told me, and I tried to turn those stories into something beautiful. So in this case, she said, "And heal I did, brutally and beautifully, left with marks and slowly getting rid of them, covering them up by growing a thicker skin, slowly and carefully." So I decided to use a PET bottle and recycle it with 3D printing. And already 3D printing, this whole process, to me actually got me thinking about layering on layering. And in this case I created a mask because of all the layers that are created. And it kind of reminds me of growing a thicker skin layer on layer. And still, it's a mask. It's not fully covered yet. It doesn't cover the face yet because it's still the process I want to show, and it's still a little bit bulky since it needs to tell the story of, okay, I'm getting there slowly, but I'm not there yet. The second story that I found was, "The cracks in my skin still show my hurt, but I feel the inner goddess from deep within myself burning, like an ancient Greek statue of a goddess with cracks in marble but maintaining an air of mystique." A little bit more poetic, but I think it was very cool to do something with this one. So for this one, I used a white plastic bag. I cut it into pieces, or in these strips, and it kind of reminded me of this marble that she was talking about, this marble effect. And since I was thinking of, okay, I want to visualize this goddess, I thought about, okay, well, these statues have these cracks in them. I think that shows this beautiful, well, not really full again, not yourself again, but still getting there and show the beauty of what used to be ugly, but is turning into something mystique or beautiful. This is my beautiful friend Amy, who wanted to be the model. The last one was a project with glass. By your heart breaking, there's a crack, and with that crack, light seeps in. I allow myself to let my heart break, and then let the light inside of me fill the cracks again. I thought this one was a beautiful one to use when I was working with pieces of glass. So I just crushed all this glass, and I thought this brittleness of glass, but also the strength of glass, symbolizes in a way the brittleness of your heart, but also the fiercefulness of someone going through this process. And of course, with glass, you have the effect that light can shine through. So I created this art piece in the end from glass. So again, with this project, it was more about how I could understand the material in a way so that I can use it to tell a story, and I could understand its characteristics so that I could actually get to some type of experience that I wanted to evoke in people. So now we are 5 years after that train experience, and the world looks a little bit more like this now. So technology is shaping our everyday a little bit more. We communicate through flat screens, but we communicate online a lot, and there's so much going on, so much information coming our way, but also so many different worlds that we can experience online that are not, well, they're real, but not in our life. So this is going on right now, but when you look at many, well, when I look at many of my friends, including myself, this could also be a little bit overwhelming. There's so much information coming our way, and so many decisions we need to make, and so much going on that sometimes our mind gets a little bit clustered, although we try to find ways to become more at peace and try to somehow create a sense of peace in our life again. So, millennial me, I heard it's a problem of many millennials that they have with technology and what's going on in their life, and so much is possible and we have so much potential. But I think it's actually a problem of everyone around us. Because what I hear a lot around me is actually, okay, I feel kind of stuck. My messy mind is so overwhelmed with thoughts, and how to distinguish something, what I truly need or want, and how to keep a journal. Everyone's talking about keeping a journal, but what to write and where to start, and how to figure out where I want to go. And decision making kind of stresses me out. And I need to think of finding my purpose? How? I feel so much pressure to figure it out. And I have so many ideas in my head. I feel like I can do anything, but how to arm myself with a practical action toolkit to actually do something. So this is, I think, very common with a lot of people around me, so including me. And it also started, my mind kind of got overwhelmed by this fact as well, because I thought, okay, so these digital experiences are now such a great part of our lives, and all these different struggles we are dealing with, we can find an app for that, but I don't know if that's really gonna help us on the long run. So then at some point I thought, okay, so we're kind of stuck sometimes when everything's messy and everything's uncertain. It reminded me of a creative process, to be honest, a design process. Because when you look at the design squiggle, and you have these different phases you go through as a designer in a creative project, I try to look at life and try to see these messy periods as the messy middles. So I thought, okay, we have all these struggles in our messy middle. We have so much trouble of getting to this next stage in life. But what if we can use these design methods that we use for structuring our creative process and turn this messy middle into something insightful, and further on actually create interesting concepts with them? What if we can use those methods and apply them to our own life? So I started doing that, actually. I started mapping my own thoughts on the wall and started clustering them and started to envision what I wanted to achieve every time when I was kind of stuck and thought, I needed to find a new job, or I needed to start a new creative project, or I wanted to start a new creative project. And I realized that it helped me a lot, because it helped me to get this cluttered brain of mine into something a little bit more structured, so I could actually figure out what I needed to focus on and what was at that time important, and I could forget about the rest. So I started developing this methodology, and I actually still want to imagine all these worlds that go beyond flat screens. And I started to imagine, okay, so how can I help others with that? How can I help others imagine their worlds beyond flat screens? So that's why I started to create this methodology. I'm still in the messy middle, to be honest, so I'm still working my way through and structuring this process. But I think the most important thing about it is that I found out during all these projects as well, is how important it is that we have tangible experiences still. Of course, the digital experiences also do so much for us, but the tangible experiences are very important, and when it comes to thoughts and ideas and how you feel, making them tangible is very valuable. So this is my next creative venture, and I've called it the Imaginary Treehouse, since I live in Rotterdam, in a beautiful urban treehouse. And I guess in the end, it's all about wonder and using your imagination. And from using your imagination, you can always create something new. So that's my story for today. I want to thank you all for taking your time to listen to everything I had to say. If you want to connect with me in any way, or I can connect with you in any way, please just talk to me. And send me an email or connect with me online, because I really want to hear all your stories, because there are so many creatives in this room, and I kind of feel weird that I'm the only one talking, because everyone has such an interesting story. So please connect. Thank you.